have, in one respect, having been born and brought up in the borough, you don't really, from a young age, kind of see it. You don't really understand it until you get more involved. So, my influence is actually coming into politics in the first place, and it's that challenge around, you talk about community, you talk about Hounslow, but what does that actually mean to you, and what does it mean to those around you? And often articulating that has been very, very difficult, because there is so much. Hounslow is so many, it's so diverse, so different. So really articulating that has been difficult, often difficult for me personally. But it's all about vision, and actually, without sounding cheesy, Steve Curran was a big influence on that in terms of vision, because he definitely had a vision about supporting people into housing. And for him, the story was always, whatever happens in terms of the conversation around development, look at those individuals that we go and meet as councillors who are moving into the house for the first time, and the look of joy on their face, and relief that they've got a roof over their head. And that's really, really important. More broadly than that, that challenge around what does it mean to be a resident in Hounslow, that was something that I was challenged by my political mentor who brought me into politics. He always used to talk about it's all very well talking about big vision, but actually it's about those individuals on the street that you meet, and the change that you make for them that really influences my thinking. So moving the council closer to people is so important, because people need to feel invested in their local area. They need to feel listened to, and that's always been a driving force for me. So even when I with my previous portfolio and my current portfolio, actually, on the finance, it's not so much about the pounds and pence in the town hall, it's about how those pounds and pence are being spent locally to the benefit of local people. And that really is something that is very, very important to me.
Who was your mentor?
It's a councillor, Rajawat. So he was one of the ward councillors. So at the age of 16, I went and did some work experience with my MP at the time, Alan Keane, who sadly passed away. And he introduced me to Rajawat. And Rajawat, I think one of the first things he said to me is, lots of high and mighty stuff happens at Parliament. Let's talk about what's happening locally. You live in the area. What are you seeing? What are the issues that you're seeing? What and you're hearing about? Okay, well, here's a challenge. How would you deal with that? And what would you do that was different? Okay, that's very high and mighty and big vision stuff. What about the small things, the small interventions that you can put into place? And he really challenged me on that. And I think that's really grounded my thinking around where I want Hounslow Council to be, and how I want our council to interact with our partners.
And you mentioned you spent time on the planning committee. How long were you on that committee, and how did that influence how you look at planning and development? Did it change how you see things?
Yeah, it definitely did. So again, before you go onto the planning committee, I don't think you fully appreciate the level of complexity in some of the conversations that go on, and I fully appreciate that. I think the way it sort of shaped my view on it is that the good developments that you saw, they shone through beyond the officer's report. You'd hear the developer come and address the committee, and you think to yourself, wow, this person is saying something that really accords with what I think the borough needs. And at that point in time, when I was on the planning committee, actually, I hadn't developed as much of the vision as I have now. So, it helped in that sort of that process that I had and I've been through. But you could really tell that they had been out and spoken to local people and really understood what made them tick. and not only spoke to them, but then also reflected that in their plans, be it through changes or concessions that sometimes they made. And that would shine through in comparison to those who came across. I mean, by way of example, probably the worst planning committee I had to sit through was the applicant's agent sat there and went, "This is what your officers are saying. They are telling us that this is why the scheme should be recommended, and I've got nothing more to add to that." And it really got the planning committee's back up. It was like, well, okay, our officers are there to do the technical stuff. What about the rest of it? And that's an example of what I think is bad partnership working. It's hiding behind a technical document rather than understanding what Hounslow is all about.
That's really insightful. Thank you. And you mentioned earlier in our interview a formative university experience. I don't know. You sort of dangled some sort of something happened at university, and I'm very curious. So I'm not going to let go. Well, tell us about your how university influenced your career.
You weren't meant to pick up on that, Toby. No, I mean, it was really interesting. So I did my degree at the University of Kent at Canterbury. So I think the first thing for me was actually leaving London. Having been in Hounslow, done all my education there, in many respects, Hounslow is a very busy place. It's very vibrant. There's a lot going on, and there's always something going on. And so moving out of London to Canterbury was a big change. Everything stopped at 11 o'clock pretty much. And, there were 2 clubs in the city, and not even they were open all the time. So, it was understanding that there are variations everywhere. But what I found about Canterbury is that the sense of community was much, much better. I mean, people actually knew who their neighbours were. And they knew what was happening in the local community, and they were very invested. So, there'd be street parties, and there'd be people mingling and talking. And that was a real change from a lot of Hounslow, where people kind of go to work and come home. And then they're within their family units, and that was very, very different for me, and it was that sort of understanding around what it means to be a community, and also in terms of in development terms, although I know that's not the crux of your question. It was fascinating looking at Canterbury, such a historic city, with modern bits that kind of blended in and complemented what was already there, and that was a key lesson for me. It's there I really realized that actually development isn't necessarily a bad thing. It can work really, really well if it's done correctly.